a world of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. It's the David Knight Show.
As the clock strikes 13, it's Monday, the 29th of June, year of our Lord 2026. Well, Trump compared himself over the weekend to Atlas, to God, and to a communist dictator. He got one of those right. And he did it at the Faith and Freedom Coalition, had their evangelical meeting. So we're going to talk about that, what happened over the weekend. We had a Chinese 9/11. Yeah, we had a terrorist attack in China. They handled it very differently. This one appeared to be real, and of course with real results. The building did not collapse in on itself. We have a lot of interesting news, and as we talk about things collapsing in on themselves, we're going to take a look at what's going on with the artificial intelligence industry. Perhaps we should call it artifice intelligence. OpenAI has delayed their IPO because people are starting to catch on to the circular investing scheme, as well as the hype surrounding all this. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Well, I want to begin with something I think is very important. Here they are. Here's the books. I don't have the books. I hadn't planned on doing this, but I just saw this. We've got Jack Lawson is putting on sale for the month of July. Declare your independence, folks. Get the Civil Defense Manual. It is now going to be 41% off the regular price. It's usually just under $100, so it's going to be $56.29. That is a bargain. This is 2 volumes of printed material that's going to be there when the internet goes down, when your computers go down. It'll be there even in an EMP or a grid down situation. And it has a wealth of information about preparing for catastrophe, whether it's natural or man-made, and very wise advice that's in there. One of the best that you'll ever find. And right now it's going to be on sale, 41% off in July. So I just want to let people know about that. Yes, Jack Lawson supports the program, but folks, I recommend this. I'd interviewed him a long time before he became a supporter and sponsor. And because I believe in this. This is great information. And if you want to see how good it is, go to jacklawsonbooks.com, and you can find a link to take a look at his chapter on just making sure you got a supply of water. That in and of itself is great, and a good example of the quality of information that is in these 2 volumes. That is essentially, he makes that available for free. So as we look at what could possibly happen, we had a plane crashing into Beijing's tallest building, and it actually is closely linked to the Chinese government. It's there in the capital. And the Chinese TV news center is right across the street. But they didn't talk about it at all. It's total crickets because it was a real terrorist attack. And they don't want to give it publicity. And it's kind of interesting because it didn't fall down. Because these buildings don't fall down in their own footprint a couple of hours after they're hit. As a matter of fact, in this particular one, they're saying, well, it killed 13 people, the pilot plus 12 people in the building. It was a small plane. And there was a lot of glass and other debris that landed on the street. I don't know if the people died on the street or in the plane. But they said within a couple of hours, there was no sign that anything had happened. There was a fire and all the rest of the stuff, but, this is a steel skyscraper. And when you think about the fact that the Twin Towers were surrounded on the perimeter with steel girding, it makes it all the more unbelievable. We've never seen a steel skyscraper that collapsed in its own footprint in free fall after a few hours. I mean, if you can't see that, I don't know what else to tell you. If you can't see this thing collapsing in free fall and think that something is fishy about this, your gullibility quotient is off the charts. And I've had a lot of people who are intelligent people who just are so caught up in what authorities tell them. I had a close friend who was a Christian, and I didn't fight with him over that, but he was an architect. And he said, well, these NIST has come out. They've got an explanation about how this happened. I said, no, come on. You really don't believe that, do you? As a matter of fact, it's all been debunked. It was a study that was funded by 9/11 architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth out of an engineering college in Alaska, and they debunked that completely. But it doesn't pass the sniff test when you look at any of this stuff. So what happened in China? Flight data indicates the plane did not suffer an engine failure. It's also prohibited for any air traffic to weave in between the skyscrapers of Beijing for obvious reasons. So it is a restricted area for flying. So he violates these restrictions. He didn't have an engine failure. So it's looking like it was deliberate, but they don't want anybody to talk about it. As a matter of fact, when the American press showed up, I think it was Reuters or Associated Press, I think it was Reuters, when they showed up, it was Reuters. When they showed up to take pictures of what was going on, the police told them to leave, and they said, why are you telling us to leave? He says, well, I think you know why, This is China, after all. You're not allowed to report anything that might embarrass the government, that the government doesn't want to report it. And as a matter of fact, we're headed in that direction. We're well on the road to that as well. So they lie about a real terrorist event. Meanwhile, in the U.S., they stage a terrorist false flag and then talk about it incessantly so they can establish a police surveillance state, kick that reality off. That's the reality, the police surveillance state. It was just a manufactured event to push people in that direction. So it is yet again another reminder. We've seen these types of things of buildings that have been on fire, steel skyscrapers on fire for days. And it might be a burned out, twisted metal hulk, but it does not collapse. We've seen that over and over again. And as one guy that I talked to in the UK, Tony Rook, his father was a police officer, and he set up a mock trial and did a documentary about it. And he brought in firefighters and others, and they asked the question. They said, okay, so if this were real, if this actually happened, why haven't there been any changes in the procedures to fight fires? Why haven't there been any changes in the building codes? And of course, we've had skyscrapers that have been hit by airplanes in the past. In the early 20th century, there was a plane that flew into the Empire State Building in New York. And as a result, they changed the building code to make sure that they were going to be able to withstand that type of thing. That's what I was telling my friend. It's like, don't get caught up in the hand waving and the simulations and so forth that they claim are scientific. Just take a look at the bigger picture. If this is real, why haven't they changed building codes? If this is real, why haven't they changed firefighting codes? I mean, look what they did with TSA. Look at how they changed everything. Look at how they got rid of the Bill of Rights. But they're not going to change the building code. They're not going to change the firefighting tactics. That's the dog that is barking. So as they point out, one picture here, you can see a hole. Video footage taken in a nearby building by a witness showed fire trucks blasting water to smoke billowing out of the building that is 1,700 feet tall, and the wreck of a plane lying on the ground beside the building. And that building doesn't even have a perimeter of steel grids like the World Trade Center did. So where was the wreckage on 9/11? Where was the wreckage in New York of the plane? Where was the wreckage of the plane at the Pentagon? Yeah, that's another dog that didn't bark, isn't it? Police asked people to delete footage of the incident, as a matter of fact. And so a lot of people that Reuters talked to say, I had it, but I deleted it. They're afraid that the government is going to be able to get into their phone and see if they've got that, because that's what our government wants. That's what Marsha Blackburn wants. She wants complete access to everything that you do in a permission society. Think about that, folks of Tennessee. This woman wants to be our governor. She is leading the charge in into the technocratic police state. You should call her Marcia of the Beast Blackburn, like Mark of the Beast Blackburn. Everything she wants is about a Mark of the Beast government ID. Police were preventing people from taking pictures, asking others to delete the pictures that they'd taken, ushering people away from the building with dozens of police cars and several fire trucks lining the nearby roads. So much like Trump's USA today, right? Don't take any pictures of ICE. If you do, we might have to kill you. So airspace, again, is heavily restricted in downtown Beijing. A police officer later told Reuters journalists to leave. Asked why, he said, "We all know why."
They didn't want any buildings falling down in sympathy like Building 7 did.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, this thing could fall down any minute. You got to get out of here. They didn't use that lie. They just told people, do what we say. So hours later, it was like nothing had happened. Again, it was a pilot plus 13 other people who were killed. So the media affiliated with the Chinese government reported that the pilot, the only person on board, had been killed and 13 people injured at the scene. Well, they weren't killed, I guess, but injured. It's also raised questions of how the pilot managed to fly over China's fortified capital. That's why they're shutting this down. They're really embarrassing. Imagine if a pilot can do this. Imagine what drones could do, right? That's the vulnerability that everybody has right now. There was a massive launching of drones by Ukraine into Russia. Over 660 of them. Russia says that it shot down a lot of those. Who knows? I mean, the fog of war, the lies surrounding war, who knows exactly what's happening with that. But again, drone warfare has changed the nature of everything. And the only concern about the data centers is how they can protect them against drones. And as Matt Trujillo pointed out, why would anybody want to attack a data center? Once they catch on. It's called the Artilect War. Once people realize what this is truly about, it's not about just making you poor by raising your electricity rates and making electricity unreliable because you have overburdened the grid. No, it's about what the government wants to do in terms of turning us into a replica of China. China has always been the beta test site for the technocracy, for the dystopian authoritarian society they want to install. So deadly and highly public incidents in China are sometimes followed by official information vacuums that can last for years. For example, they've still not given any official explanation after 4 years after a China Eastern Boeing 737 800-passenger jet crashed in the Guangxi region and killed 132 people, and the country's deadliest air disaster for decades. So they don't even talk about it. Didn't happen. Forget about it. And if you press it, we have solutions for people like you. Meanwhile, there's a nationwide backlash against cameras that are watching your car. This was reported by the Wall Street Journal, and it is getting big, and it should be big. We need to understand, and we need to tie this flock stuff in with the AI data centers, because the AI data centers are really not about artificial intelligence. It's about what artificial intelligence, the power that it brings to the government. It's not about your electrical power. It's about this type of thing. And people are pushing back against the flock cameras and things like that in various local facilities. And they need to push back for the same reasons for the data centers. And I think if people understood that's really what the data centers are about, they'd push back against it, because they're doing that for the surveillance cameras. The surveillance cameras aren't using massive amounts of power. They're not intruding into our lives. They're not using massive amounts of electricity. They're not burdening the grid. They're not creating noise and light and disturbance, and they're not consuming water. But people understand what they're about. And people need to understand that the data centers are much worse than these flock cameras. That's where they're going to be collating and mining the information that the flock cameras feed into them. The flock cameras are just the front end of the data centers. So let's get with the program, folks. Let's understand what their program is. So meanwhile, chemtrails are also back in the news. Scientists mull controversial plan to steer hurricanes. This is from USA Today. they keep playing this game like, well, you can't really control the weather, but let's figure out how we're going to do it. And who sets the thermostat, right? This is what we see all the time. And so this is going back and forth about, well, who gets to get rain and who gets a drought? It's kind of interesting. I saw a mainstream media article where they were pushing like the climate MacGuffin again. And they were saying almost all the country is in drought conditions except for like 3 or 4 states. I thought, well, let me look at this and see what those states are. Because I know around here, we are not in a drought. As a matter of fact, we have tons and have been for the last month or so. We've had a lot of rain. We've been blessed with that. So much so, as a matter of fact, the ponds are overflowing. We've been here for 4 years now, and we've not seen that happen before. Now, this is the most water that we've had in 4 years. And yet, in this article, they didn't list Tennessee as being a state that was not in drought conditions. Well, that certainly isn't the case in eastern Tennessee. So cloud seeding is at the center of the proposal coming out of the Government Accountability Office, talking about how they can steer hurricanes. And it kind of reminds me of Pat Robertson, who died the last couple of weeks. I saw that he passed away. But I remember the controversy when he was praying away the hurricane and, send it on up north, Lord, to those heathen up in New York and New Jersey or whatever. And people were ripping him for that. But instead of just saying, well, we need to diminish it, they're doing the same thing Pat Robertson did. Instead of finding ways to disperse the hurricane, they can't really do that. Let's just steer it. I think we could steer it somewhere else. So where are you going to steer it? So cloud seeding, they said, is not enough by itself. And yet we have seen over and over again when you have some of these Arab Gulf states where they need a lot of water. And so they've worked very hard on how they can manufacture rain. And then they wind up with these massive deluges that happen. And of course, people point out, well, perhaps that has something to do with your research that's there. Oh, no, couldn't be that at all. They've been talking about geoengineering for the longest time. I remember over a decade ago, I covered the conference. They had an annual conference on it. And one of the papers said, who gets to set the thermostat, right? It isn't a question of if they can do it, but what they set the thermostat to. Who gets cooler temperatures, who gets warmer temperatures. Cloud seeding is now at the center of the rise in weather control conspiracy narratives. I wonder why people think there's a conspiracy. It isn't like they're talking about it. It's just like the Zionism stuff, when people say, oh, there's genocide that's happening in Gaza, and there is. And the Israelis are like, yeah, so what? We're proud of it. And the American Zionists are saying, no, there isn't. Same thing with this. You got one group of people out there bragging about what they can do and how they're going to control the weather. Other people say, oh, that's just a conspiracy theory. They can't do that. A lot of narratives about the disasters. They give an example. The tragic Texas floods of 2025 that killed dozens of people, many of them children. After the floods, viral claims alleged a nearby cloud seeding operation caused the disaster. A meteorologist said there was zero evidence of that claim. Seeding can only moderately enhance rainfall, not create catastrophic floods. Well, again, maybe they're doing something in addition to the seeding. They have been working on this for decades. As a matter of fact, there was an early research scientist that was doing this kind of work in Vietnam, and he was given an award for modifying the weather as part of the Vietnam War. And shortly after that, they came up with a global treaty against weather modification. Why would you bother to do that if it wasn't real? Why would you hand out awards if it wasn't real? Well, Ford has asked AI to build better cars. Then they found out that AI was messing up their cars. So they've had to go back and rehire the engineers that they fired, who were very experienced at how to maintain quality control. The problem with all this is that as Ford, 350 engineers lost their jobs, they were going to be replaced by artificial intelligence. They found out that AI wasn't doing a very good job, so they have now rehired the engineers, but there's a caveat to all this. They're going to have these experienced engineers do a better job at training their replacement AI. Then I guess they'll fire them. A growing number of companies have figured out that the technology carries a steep price tag and a habit of getting things wrong. Ford ranked first amongst mainstream brands in J.D. Power's initial quality study. The company revealed how central AI has become, but admitted that it carries pitfalls. They said they underestimated the value of seasoned human engineers who could actually, and once they did that, it dragged their quality down. We can replace them with some artificial intelligence. And just understand, I think, as I said, we need to understand that perhaps artificial intelligence is better described as artifice intelligence. When we talk about something being artificial, that means it's synthetic, it's man-made, it's fake, it's genuine, right? Not genuine. And this intelligence is not genuine. It is man-made. It is synthetic. It looks like it's real, but it's no more real than your synthetic leather, the pleather that you get sometimes, that's not real either. It may look a lot like leather and it may be good enough for what you're doing, but it's not real leather. Well, artifice is a little bit different. It's not just that it's artificial. It is something that has an element of deception in it, right? An element of trying to deceive someone. We talk about a magician and they have artifice. And I think as we look at this, artificial intelligence is becoming more and more artifice intelligence. The things that they're selling so many corporations and individuals with all this is a lot of artifice. But the reality is that it is genuinely a threat to our liberty and our dignity and our freedom and the Constitution. And that's the way the government is using it. That's why the government has been pushing so hard for all of this. Many experienced employees left Ford before their knowledge could be passed on to the AI models. So they didn't leave, they were fired. Let's just understand that, 350 of them. So Ford had to rehire, promote, and bring back over 350 engineers to retrain these systems and to improve the data collection methods used by AI. Then they can fire them. This is like the people who are driving for Uber and these other, taxi, these other companies like Uber and Lyft. And as people were signing up to do this, you had Travis Kalanick, who was the CEO of Uber at the time, saying, yeah, what makes our cars expensive is that other dude in the car with you, the driver, the owner of the car. We got to get rid of that guy. And then we'll make it cheaper. You really think they will? Once they've got a monopoly, once there's no human drivers, you think they're really going to lower the price? It'll be just the opposite. And so I'm looking at this, and I'm thinking, these poor people out there working these gigs, paying for the upkeep of their car, and just getting, paid for the taxi service that they're doing. Meanwhile, the people who run this thing are doing everything they can to slit their throat and fire them. Same thing with Ford.
And then there's the question of who's going to be paying to use their taxi service when no one has a job to get money or to go to in the first place.
Well, that's why they're pushing so hard for the UBI, for universal basic income. That's why Elon Musk, the first thing he did in politics was to give $1 million to Andrew Yang, because Andrew Yang's policy was universal basic income. And when Michael Bloomberg was running for president, that's what he said as well. He insulted farmers, he insulted factory workers. He said anybody can do those jobs. The smart ones of us, like me, smart people like me, we're figuring out how we can get rid of those people. The only thing we have to do is we've got to figure out how we pacify them using universal income, because if we don't, they're going to come after us with guillotines. That was what Bloomberg said. And most people, the Republican media picked up and said, look at that, he criticized farmers. Do you really want this guy as president? Well, I don't want him as president because he is a cynical, Machiavellian technocrat, not because he insulted farmers. Farmers can hold their own. And many people pointed that out, but they missed the entire point of it. I really couldn't believe it. And it was in a Breitbart article at the time. Breitbart just has no discernment whatsoever. They printed his remarks in full, and then they went with the standard headline that everybody else did. And I could excuse it on a lot of different news outlets because maybe they only heard the part where he criticized the farmers. But when you look at his remarks in full, And he's talking about how they've got to have universal basic income so we don't kill them when they take everything from us. That's the headline right there for you. You missed the lead in that article. Anyway, mistakenly, we thought that by just introducing artificial intelligence and adjusting the design requirements that we had, that we would produce a high-quality product, said Ford. No, it didn't work out that way. So we got to have the humans back for a short period of time, then we'll get rid of them. Meanwhile, one of these supercar manufacturers, I guess they call them a hypercar once they get this expensive, Pagani, they've only made V12 internal combustion engines. I mean, this is one of these hypercar companies. Everything is highly optimized for this. It is the ultimate thing. So the owner said, well, we looked into and we spent a lot of money looking at an EV supercar, but we realized there was zero interest in it. And, you know, that's one of the things that Eric Peters has always talked about. He said, how do these car companies who have spent so many decades upon decades, a century of knowledge in terms of fine-tuning internal combustion engines and that type of thing, this is what allowing China to just leapfrog everybody, right? The government mandates. Okay, well, you got this technology that you worked on, and it truly is amazing what they can do, whether you're talking about horsepower, whether you're talking about emissions. You know, the government comes in with all these new requirements, and it's like, all right, we can fix that. It makes the car more expensive, but they can do the engineering and they can fix that. So then they come along and say, well, just forget all that, and we're going to throw this all out the window. Then anybody with a motor and a battery can now make a car. And the Chinese are going to make them incredibly cheaply. And the Premier of Canada is going to pave the way for them to come into Canada in a big way. But going back to Pagani, before we get into what's happening with Canada and EVs, he said, we took a look at it. We realized that there was actually zero interest in this, so we shelved the project. And he said, I don't have a problem with EV, so whatever the people want. This is what happens if you're market driven, right? So it's only had V12 internal combustion engines. They looked at the EV powertrain. It's like, anybody can do that. So he told an audience at a car convention, he said that they drummed up plans for an electric supercar. At the time, he said the reasons for it simply happened, starting with the complexity. But he said there wasn't any interest on it. He said we worked on it until 2022. And for me, it was a much more difficult project. And we ended up spending more time on the electric car than on the one with an internal combustion engine. He said no one showed any interest in the idea. I would have liked to have seen it come to fruition, if only to recoup the investments that we'd made. We're too small of a company to work on projects that don't pan out. But he said it was simply the fact that nobody wanted it. He was simply following what the market wanted. Meanwhile, even General Motors is now being driven back to look at the marketplace after losing billions of dollars on government EV incentives and mandates. Now they're talking about spending $150 million to support a future combustion-powered Cadillac project. And this is at their facility in Spring Hill, Tennessee. They've invested $275 million, and 125 of that will go to support the continued production of their 2.7-liter engine. GM has earmarked the rest for a future combustion-powered Cadillac. So all of that money is being spent on internal combustion engines. Meanwhile, when you look at when we get into what is happening with the EVs, a big part of the concern of the Trump administration with Canada going into EVs is like, these things are not secure. China could see what we're doing. It's just, it's like Bucky Sturgison, General, and Dr. Strangelove. They'll see the big board. China will see the big board. They'll see where everybody's going. It's like, I don't really care if China wants to watch where I'm going. I care if the American government wants to watch where we're going. And they're talking about how, well, it's a Trojan horse. I say, I should contact Eric Peters and tell him, you need to have a rating in terms of, we always talk about horsepower of cars, right? You need to talk about the Trojan horsepower of these connected vehicles, because the Trojan horsepower is going off the charts and it's growing faster than horsepower ever grew during the days when we made things that people wanted. And then take a look at what is happening to homes. Now, this is a highlight, probably one of the best things that the Trump administration has done in terms of coming back against some of these new regulations. Nevertheless, they're leaving the infrastructure for these regulations all in place. And the infrastructure is diametrically opposed to the Constitution. It's these very bureaucracies that the Biden administration, the Democrats, and the climate MacGuffin people used to put in. They're leaving all of that in place. So, of course, it'll come back with the next Democrat, and it'll come back with a vengeance. But here's a look at what is really happening to our lives. This is new building codes that are, quote unquote, green, and they would add $14,000 to the cost of new homes. Now, when you look at this, homes have gotten so expensive that most of the people who are not in the home market already are looking at it and saying, well, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to buy a home. While the government is still busy piling this debt onto us and running up the cost unnecessarily of these homes, this is not anything that even makes the home more comfortable, safer, nothing. We get nothing for this. This is just green. And the green is going to the grifters who are pushing these agendas. A new analysis released by the Department of Energy found that the adoption of the 2024 International Energy Conservation Code would increase residential construction costs by more than $9.2 billion annually compared to the 2006 code levels. And this is where the devil resides, the details in the housing costs. And as I said when Trump started running around with the tariffs, I said the real issue, the real thing that makes us non-competitive is government regulation. You need to get rid of the regulation before you start adding taxes at the border, because that's just going to drive the price of ingredients up. Components are going up and all the rest of the stuff. It's going to make us less competitive with other countries by adding taxes for materials and systems that we need to import. And we are not self-sufficient in the United States. So we're already seeing evidence of that. The reality is that it is the regulation stupid that is affecting the economy. It was James Carville who said, it's the economy, stupid. They don't care about Monica Lewinsky. So it's the regulation that is ruining the economy, stupid. So Energy Secretary Chris Wright said in a press release, he said, climate activists have pushed regulations that increase housing costs, reduce consumer choice, make it harder for Americans to build and own a home. And you can say the same thing about the cars as well. He said, Trump will continue fighting for the American people, blah, blah, blah. Well, I'm glad that, like I said, that I thought was the brightest spot of Trump's first administration, were some of the things that were delayed or rolled back, but it certainly wasn't enough. And if you leave the Department of Energy in place, and if you leave the EPA in place, and if you leave these findings in there that the EPA can regulate air quality, and if you leave in the rules and regulations that are put in for the Department of Energy to regulate the energy efficiency rather than having the marketplace regulate it, if you leave all that stuff in, and if you leave those agencies around, it's all going to come rushing back. This is like casting out a demon. It wanders around in dry places until the Democrats get in charge again, and then all of a sudden it comes home with a vengeance. That's really what we're looking at here. So they will not get rid of the mechanism. They will not get rid of the infrastructure that creates these kinds of crippling regulations, crippling for our wealth and prosperity and for the economy in general. States are required to consider adopting some variation of these codes. If states choose to update their energy codes to the 2024 construction standards, costs will increase as much as $14,000 for a single-family home. Now, they don't make any adjustment with this based on the cost of the home. And I'm assuming This is just kind of at the bare bones level. It's not something it's not $14,000 for a $5 million home. It doesn't go up. It's $14,000 for everybody. And usually Democrats hate that kind of thing. They don't like a flat tax on people. And this isn't even a percentage. This truly is like a poll tax. Most states have not yet adopted the latest version of the code, thankfully. And the Department of Energy asked the ICC in February to limit the scope of the green codes. It called on the organizations to steer clear of recommending specific fuel types, standards for appliances and other equipment, or bans on the use of gas for heating. That's why this is like a flat $14,000 across the board, regardless of the overall cost of your home. So the Department of Housing and Urban Development and the Agriculture Department repealed a Biden administration policy in April that would have required federally backed mortgages to adhere to updated energy efficiency codes. So that's how they run this thing through. You're not going to get a loan unless you go with these new, redesigned, expensive, inefficient, full of bugs, these systems that we've got to change the way you do heating and air conditioning and cooking and all the rest of this stuff. You won't get a mortgage. So they changed that blackmail. And again, it is always that, isn't it? It's always using the federal government's money, in this particular case, a federally backed mortgage. They use it to bribe, to bully, to blackmail. And that's the way this always works. That's the way they get around the 10th Amendment. That's what they did. That's what Trump did in 2020. It's like, well, if you do this kind of stuff, I can't tell you to do this. But, because of the false flags that we staged, the dark winter simulation, the anthrax attack, the 9/11 attack, because of all that stuff, we got everybody to, we produced some model legislation out of the federal government. We got a lot of states to pass it, similar to this, right? We got model legislation for building codes, and we send it to the states to adopt it. Then we come in with the money aspect of it, which is what Trump did with the pandemic. And he said to these governors, he said, well, if you do what we're recommending, I can't order you to do this, but if you do what we're recommending, there's going to be a massive amount of money. As a matter of fact, you look at these Republican governors who betrayed us, many of them like Brad Little, were getting more money given to them to be spent at their discretion, their personal discretion. They had more money to spend than the entire state budget. I mean, that's like giving catnip to a cat. They can't turn that away. So the Biden administration policy that they repealed in April would have required federally backed mortgages to adhere to updated energy efficiency codes that home builders claim could add more than $20,000 to the cost of homes. So the Trump administration is saying $14,000. The people who actually build the homes are saying $20,000. Going to make sure nobody can afford any of that. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court has handed Monsanto a major shield against Roundup cancer warnings. And of course, this is in the lawsuit that is there. The Trump administration has already done a great deal in terms of providing them cover and in terms of even giving them subsidies, declaring that they are part of the Defense Production Act. We don't have enough glyphosate. We need more of it produced. And so we're going to incentivize it. We're going to protect you with liability issues. And now the Supreme Court has stepped in and escalated this to another level as well. They handed Monsanto one of the most consequential corporate liability victories of this term, reports the New American. The ruling in Monsanto Company versus Durnell that was issued on Thursday does more than just protect the maker of Roundup from one Missouri plaintiff. It narrows the courthouse door for thousands of Americans who claim the glyphosate-based weed killer caused their cancer and should have carried a warning label. That's what this is over. Whether or not the government did nothing to warn anybody about it. So the court has taken the position that, that doesn't really matter. And this is power that resides with the federal government, and we don't really care about that. And they got it exactly wrong. But Trump has already done essentially the same thing. He already gave them legal immunity, and he also gave them, under the Defense Production Act, he gave them massive subsidies. Why would he do something like that? And why would the Republicans all cheer? And why would the big farming associations cheer that kind of stuff as well? Well, because they have the same attitude toward the people who consume their products that Big Pharma does. They really don't care about the quality of their food. They don't care if it makes you sick, if it gives you cancer, if it kills you. They really don't care, just like Big Pharma doesn't care. All they care about is how much of it they can get you to consume, just like Big Pharma. I want you to take more and more of those injections. There's never enough. It'll always be more injections that they want to push on us. And they look the other way when it comes to anything that is detrimental. They simply don't care. It is about the money and the money only. And so the same thing is true of big ag. They do not care at all about health issues. If they've got a product that's going to make the food move through the machinery better, if they've got something that's going to make the food look fresh on the shelf longer, they'll do that regardless of the health consequences. It's all simply about production. And when you look at glyphosate, for example, it's not just that it's poisoning the soil for anything that's not a GMO seed made by Monsanto, now Bayer, but it also is something that they're using against, after they grow the wheat, then they spray it with glyphosate to dry it out. And so they are contaminating this stuff at so many different levels. And they really don't care because it's just about processing the food. I mean, how many times do you look at the bizarre stuff that gets into the food? And in many cases, it's there because it was an anti-foaming agent or because it was a lubricant through the machines or whatever. And they're going to have you eat that because it's in their business interest. And the only thing they care about is the dollar sign. So it exposes an uncomfortable political fact. The Trump DOJ and EPA stood on the same side as Monsanto and Bayer, Monsanto's German parent company. They argued that because the EPA had already approved Roundup's label without a cancer warning, states couldn't use their own courts to require one. You know, we had a similar situation like this when I was in just a small business situation. But I thought of it when I saw this. We had a lot of, I guess you could say in the late 80s and early 90s, there were a lot of independent video mom and pop stores, like ours was one. And what happened was, when they put together Blockbuster, they started selling shares on Wall Street. And so they didn't have to make a profit. They never did make a profit after they were bought by Viacom, which was the parent company of CBS and Paramount and these other ones. Sumner Redstone owned it at the time. And now that's all been bought by the Ellison family. And so once they were bought, I mean, the people who put together Blockbuster, they were doing Blockbuster business and they were making a profit. But once it was bought by Viacom, they didn't really care about that. And they ran that thing for decades in the red because they could always raise money on Wall Street. You give somebody a happy story, just like Monsanto. For 10 years, they never had a product, but they had happy stories about how they were going to cure cancer and all the rest of the stuff with mRNA. And that was a matter of fact, that's, Moderna, the way they originally pronounced it was mode RNA, just so you understand that everything they were doing was about mRNA. But anyway, with the large corporations, when they go to Wall Street, they have access to unlimited amounts of money. It's just like the Federal Reserve can print fiat currency out of thin air. They do the same thing. So they operated without any need to make money or whatever. So they were just pouring money into excessive amounts, buying up out parcels right across from or right in front of an existing small mom and pop video store that was in line on the shopping center. And so they went into Cary in North Carolina, and they spent, I don't know how many millions of dollars on a piece of property because they wanted to put out this video chain that was there. And that's what they do. They target one video chain at a time, and they put stores in front of those existing stores everywhere to drive them out of business. Then they pick another one, go right down the list. It was incredibly predatory. But they buy this property for an excessive amount. And then they go to City Hall in Cary, North Carolina, and they give them a plan to do signage, which in Cary, they had extremely strict rules about signage. It wasn't like Texas. Texas is laissez-faire. I mean, you got gigantic signs everywhere about everything, and you can have a strip joint right next to a church and all the rest of the stuff. And but in Cary, it was very carefully controlled. But they got an authorization for it. And then the pushback began. The community pushed back against it. Other people in the town council were getting all this flack, and they started raising a lot of cane about all this stuff. And they said, how did this happen? This looks like an airport landing strip, the way you got all this signage stuff set up here. And they said, well, we got it approved. And they said, well, that shouldn't have been approved. That's obviously against our code. And they said, yeah, but we got the approval here. And they left it. They let it stand. They said, well, since somebody in the planning department signed off on it, you get to keep that. This is the same thing that's happening here. Well, because the big pharma, big ag, and these other people, because they've got people that they have bought off because they've done regulatory capture, because they've bribed these corrupt bureaucracies. That's what we always say. We said, who was it? Give us the name of the person in the planning department who signed off on this sign. I would like to know who that is. And maybe there ought to be an investigation to see if they got something from Blockbuster to do that. Well, they know that these companies have given a lot of money. As a matter of fact, Bayer spent $60 billion to buy Monsanto, knowing that they had this long and growing list of people who'd gotten cancer from glyphosate. And now they've spent, in order to handle that, it's like, yeah, that's no problem. I can handle that. Well, just spend $9 billion on Congress and on bureaucrats, lobbying them. And they just stoked up on lobbying. And it paid off because they get this approved at the federal level. And then when you have all of these different courts, pretty much unanimously at the state and local level, say that's wrong to not give people even a warning label about this stuff that has been identified in every other jurisdiction as a major carcinogen. And you're not even going to warn people about that? Well, you should have some liability in that. And so then the feds come in and say, no, that's right. We signed off on it. Maybe it was a mistake, but that's too bad. We signed off on it. So there are 65,000 lawsuits still active against Monsanto. And they have paid out billions and billions of dollars. So here comes Trump and Congress to save them. This is the Israel Zionist model as well, right? We can get ourselves out of any situation if we buy enough congressmen or we buy the presidency. So this case began back in 2019. A man sued Monsanto alleging that 2 decades of using Roundup had caused his non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And again, we've seen this over and over again. I've had friends who've died from this, who in a similar situation from this. Our dog died from it, from Kimlon that was on the neighbor's yard. He argued that the product should have carried a cancer warning, and a jury agreed. And then it goes to the Supreme Court, which says, no, we don't need any warning labels. We don't need no stinking badges. Badges? We don't need no stinking badges. It was Brett Kavanaugh who wrote the decision. And he had John Roberts, Clarence Thomas got it wrong. So did Samuel Alito, Sonia Sotomayor, Alina Kagan, and Amy Coney Barrett. The only people who got it right were Neil Gorsuch and Brown Jackson, who wrote the dissenting opinion, which is really amazing. I mean, it just goes to show a broken clock can be right once in his lifetime, maybe not even twice a day, but maybe once in his lifetime. So the court did not decide whether or not glyphosate causes cancer. They don't care. It decided whether or not Roundup needed to have a warning label. And they said, well, the people who get to decide that are the EPA, not state authorities. I'm sorry, where is that in the Constitution? Where is that power delegated to the federal government? Because the 9th and 10th Amendment say that if the states and the people don't delegate these powers, if they're not enumerated and specifically put in the Constitution, if those powers aren't given to the federal government, it can't presume that it has them. And those powers remain with the state and with the people, states and the people. And yet the Supreme Court just doesn't care about that. And of course, her argument for this is not an argument from the Constitution. They don't make constitutional arguments in the Supreme Court. Have you ever noticed that? In practice, it asks Americans to trust the very agency whose judgment is at the center of the controversy. And so Thomas Massie was there. And he was at the Supreme Court when they were making the arguments. He came in and he said, government agencies don't protect citizens from large corporations. Rather, they protect large corporations from the citizens. Well, we all know that. And good for him for telling us that. He said, I attended the Supreme Court arguments. The Trump DOJ argued alongside Bayer and Monsanto that because the EPA had already blessed glyphosate, no state government could require labels disclosing cancer risk. The EPA and DOJ in this instance was only there to protect Bayer. And folks, this goes back to, this is not simply a Trump thing. This is bipartisan, as you can see in the Supreme Court decision. The opposition was bipartisan, and the support for it was bipartisan as well. This all began several years ago as they were going into different farming communities, and there was an even worse product called dicamba, famously known for dicamba drift. And yes, this is not a new Brazilian dance. This is poison that is drifting onto other farms and making it so that they can't grow food. It's contaminating their organic farms, but also making it so they can't grow food unless they buy these GMO seeds from Monsanto. And so the farmers understood what this is about, and they started putting bans on glyphosate and on dicamba. And so Monsanto came in and tried to overturn this as they were putting these bans on. They spent in one farming community $8 million, and they lost because the farmers were informed, they understood the issue, they understood the poison and the risk, and no amount of spin or advertising could undo what they already knew. And so this was happening to them over and over again. In the rural communities where the farmers lived and understood what was happening with all this stuff, they were shutting it down. So the industry went to Washington during the Obama administration and said, we can't live with a patchwork quilt of regulations. The same stuff that Marsha Blackburn is doing right now in terms of trying to force digital ID to use the internet. We can't have this patchwork of regulations from states. Well, that's called federalism, Marsha. That is what the design was about, that we would have a patchwork of regulations so that we could turn the states into laboratories, if you will, to see what worked and what didn't work. But we don't want to have that kind of centralization, but the crooks do. The people in Washington who take the money and the people who, the corporations, go to Washington and bribe them and tell them, well, we need to have one set of federal regulations. And that's where all this stuff began. Now it has been solidified by what Obama started, the corrupt, they called it the Dark Act when it was done back under Obama when the Democrats did it. Now the Republicans and Trump are consolidating all of that and making sure that they have locked that into concrete. So Massey's criticisms cut across the usual partisan script, as New American says. This is not a case where liberals attacked deregulation and conservatives defended business. Gorsuch joined Jackson's dissent. Thomas joined the majority, but he wrote separately to warn about the power of federal agencies and the way broad regulatory schemes can favor large incumbent companies. It's too bad Clarence Thomas didn't write about the Constitution. That makes it pretty clear. If you want to say, well, I don't really care about the practical consequences of killing who knows how many millions of people with glyphosate and destroying their life if you don't wind up killing them. I don't really care about the practical consequences of this. We're not going to address whether or not it causes cancer, whether or not these people are becoming billionaires by killing their fellow Americans. We're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the fine points of the rule of law. Well, then talk about the Constitution for a change. And not even the dissenting opinion did that. So Thomas said, yeah, Monsanto won under current law, but he warned that such regulation of federal power can create a profitable alliance between corporations and government. And you just underscored that by your decision. Just amazing to me. So the political backdrop makes it even harder to ignore this. The U.S. Right to Know, an organization that looks at this stuff, reported in February. Here's where the lobbying comes in. This is the big pharma model. This is the APAC model. This is the big food model as well. Bayer spent $9.19 million lobbying Congress and the executive branch in 2025. That's Trump and the Republicans. They retained at least 13 outside lobbying firms. They registered 45 lobbyists. They also traced extensive Bayer ties inside the Department of Agriculture and the EPA, and they placed former industry lobbyists and legal allies in roles that shaped pesticide approval and chemical regulation. This is basically what Trump did when he put the former CEO of Eli Lilly, one of the most political of the big pharma companies. He put Alex Azar, the former CEO of Eli Lilly, he made him head of HHS. And it was Alex Azar who declared a COVID pandemic in January, 10 days after Trump got back from Davos. And we only had, at that point in time, 6 known cases. How could that be a pandemic? And they didn't even all die. And we didn't know if they were even COVID cases because they're using PCR. And using the PCR test to, quote unquote, prove that they have found something that they never isolated. That's why I had Christine Massey on again last week. So they got 45 lobbyists, 13 outside lobbying firms, over $9 million lobbying Congress. And I thought it was billion, but it is million still. It's a lot of money that they've sprinkled around. This, again, is the big pharma and the APAC model. Let's just go in and buy politicians. It works. So, and then they get people on the inside. The administration delivered a string of victories to Bayer, including DOJ support at the Supreme Court and the EPA's reapproval of dicamba. Again, they brought that back even. But it goes even beyond this when you look at the direct support that Trump has given them in terms of the Defense Production Act. Jackson's dissent cut straight across the majority premise. She said the court had departed from the near unanimous view of lower courts that had rejected Monsanto's preemption argument and accepted a theory that Congress never wrote into the law that they're talking about, which is the FIFRA, F-I-F-R-A, I guess that's how they would say it. She said that Duro's claim was not in addition to and not different from federal law. As a matter of fact, it was equivalent to what FIFRA's key labeling requirement, the prohibition on misbranding. FIFRA itself requires adequate warning. And so what she's saying is, you're setting this up as if there is a difference between what the federal government is doing in terms of labeling and what the states want. There isn't any difference because the federal government's law that you're referring to says that we want to have adequate warnings on the labeling. So what they're doing is they're just supporting that law. You're the ones who are setting yourselves up against that law. And the reality is that the Constitution says that this power does not belong to the federal government in the first place. We don't want to have an EPA, and we don't want to have a national standard of health. So we want to get rid of the FDA, the CDC, HHS, all these agencies that are used to impose this. Once you create these agencies, it's very easy to corrupt it at the top. You know, the old Greek thing that it rots from the head down. Well, cut off the head, and you don't have to worry about the rotting head. Government itself is a cancer, isn't it? And this is one case where I would recommend amputation for that cancer. The court misunderstands the requirements of the federal law, FIFRA. It misinterprets the scope of FIFRA's preemption, and it ultimately leaves the man without any remedy for the significant harms that he suffered, and all the millions of other people as well. 65,000 lawsuits active at this point in time. Children's Health Defense filed an amicus brief arguing that the EPA's glyphosate record reflects not regulatory caution, but regulatory failure. Yeah, the bottom line, as I've said before, if you look at the FDA, Food and Drugs, if you're a big corporation and you have put your personnel inside the bureaucracy and you have spent millions lining the pockets of politicians and presidents, politicians in Congress. If you do that, then FDA stands for free to do anything. Whether you're talking about food or drugs, you are free to do anything if you pay off the people. Now, if you're not somebody who's paying off the people, you are forbidden to do anything. You're forbidden to talk about even ivermectin or some of these other things. No, you can't talk about that. That's not something that has gotten prior approval by bribing bureaucrats and politicians. So Children's Self-Defense pointed to the Food Quality Production Act that requires EPA to apply an additional tenfold safety margin when assessing pesticide risks to infants and children, unless reliable data justifies a lower standard. Well, they got rid of that. And so what they did was they said, well, we're not going to do it 10 to 1 as the law says. We're just going to go 1 to 1. And we don't have any data that shows that. We haven't tested that. Said EPA's refused to apply the tenfold child protection safety factor to glyphosate since 1998. Instead, they've just wiped that away. So what you do is you say, well, we're going to regulate this. I'm going to do it at the federal level because we don't want to have a patchwork quilt. That's just too bad for business, right? And so we're going to have one standard. And they come up with a standard. It looks good on paper, and yet the bureaucrats just wave it away if they are paid. The entire problem of regulatory capture of the EPA would not be an issue if there were no EPA. They got it right. That's the New American. They're right. The EPA is not a constitutional federal agency. It's worth noting that it was created by Richard Nixon, by the way. So, this is, it is a travesty if ever there was one. It is horrific what is being done in terms of whether you're talking about the war, the domestic war against us, against our freedoms, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, and creating these poisonous things in our food and our drugs. So much for Maha, right? I said from the very beginning it was a ha-ha. You got somebody like RFK Jr., who you look at his personal life and you understand the man has absolutely no principles. Don't be surprised then when he sells out to power. And his own son put up that video when he was getting that call from Trump, if you remember. And you go back to his campaign, he's out there talking about peace a great deal and how we got to stop war. Gerald Slinty was hopeful that he was sincere, and so he gave him a lot of money, gave him the maximum that he could give him as an individual. And then RFK Jr. flips when he starts running for, as he gets along the way, he starts cheering for Israel in the middle of the genocide. And Gerald Slinty demanded and got back his money. I didn't know there was a return policy on politicians. I've never given them money, but I'd like to get my vote back from many of them that I voted for in the past. But I thought they all came with a no return policy. So good for Gerald for getting his money back. So the Center for Biological Diversity said the disturbing reality is that glyphosate is just the tip of the pesticide iceberg. The EPA has approved hundreds of poisons. The agency itself is linked to cancer, and our parents, our kids, and our loved ones are paying for it with their health, sometimes with their lives. The need to profoundly reform our industry-captured system of pesticide regulation could not be clearer. Well, the bottom line is it's not just pesticides, it's not just drugs, and it's not just Israel. It's everything in the federal government. Everything has been captured. It is a cesspool of corruption and of bribery. They bribe people at the state level, and they themselves get bribed by these corporations and these foreign governments to do whatever the interests want. The consequences could extend far beyond Roundup, he said. Other pesticide manufacturers could also benefit from a legal environment that makes it harder for people harmed by these products to seek justice. Yeah, exactly right. So, you go in and you pay $60 billion for a company that's got 60, 70,000 lawsuits still outstanding and has paid billions of dollars in judgments on the few that they've settled. And you say, well, we can handle this. We'll just give a few million to the people in Congress. And as I said before, you give them millions and you rake in billions. That's the way it always works, isn't it? So they're basically giving a free ride to the known creator of carcinogens. They're exposing the entire country to these carcinogens, and the Supreme Court just gave them complete immunity so they can continue to do this. Yeah, folks, because the federal government is a cancer, and it is at stage 4, quite frankly. The EPA has repeatedly found that glyphosate is unlikely to pose a cancer risk, yet in the rest of the world, whether you're talking about the World Health Organization or you're talking about Europe, they all understand what it really is, and we understand what it is as well. The difference is they haven't spent the money on the people in the EU yet. Maybe they will, but they can always point to the U.S. and they can always kill us first. Maybe that's what America first means. We poison America first. That's the Trump administration's version of it. Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about something that Big Pharma and Big Med does not want you to know when it comes to cancer, especially we're talking about glyphosate and other things like this. Let me read some of these comments here. Stealth Patriot, thank you very much for the tip. He said, did you see the video of the guy in Oklahoma being arrested for speaking up at a city council meeting against data centers? I've seen a couple of them. I'm not sure I saw that particular one. I can't believe the entire crowd of people did nothing. They should have. Yeah, they should rise up en masse, because at some point in time, you do have to do that. It'd be better to do it sooner rather than later. It'd be better to do it peacefully rather than have it result in violence. As JFK said, if you make peaceful revolution impossible, you make violent revolution inevitable. And I would say that by our peaceful acquiescence in these things, we're making it inevitable that there will be a violent revolution against us, violent on the part of the government against us. Big Brit is back again, says the one in the UK never collapsed. It was burning for a couple of days. Yes, I've seen several of those buildings. There's been the UK, and there were some in other third world countries. I think there was one in Malaysia. I'm a little bit foggy on that. Anyway, I remember seeing the big burned out, twisted metal of it did not collapse. Steel buildings do not collapse in their own footprint. Nibiru 2029, China already had the most extreme surveillance state on the planet. It has no need to propagandize anything in order to increase surveillance. That's right. Who needs a false flag when you just do it by fiat? And that's what we've had one president after the other say. We had George W. Bush say it. We've had Justin Trudeau say it. And they all really lust after it, whether they say the loud part out loud or not. They say, well, I wish I was like the Chinese communists. As a matter of fact, Trump did that over the weekend. He said, hey, I'd be the best communist leader you could have. He compared himself to communist leaders. He compared himself to God. And one of those is true. But Trump Burger says, imagine flying a jetliner for over an hour without proper training and zero ATC contact, air traffic control. Hard to believe. Yeah, impossible to believe, I would say. As a matter of fact, there's also pilots for 9/11 Truth, not just architects and engineers. The pilots for 9/11 Truth, one of them in particular that I reported on, is a guy who was an instructor for these planes that they said flew into the Pentagon. He said, you can't fly that plane that close to the ground at that speed because of the air density. You can only fly as you get closer to the ground, the air is more dense and it limits your maximum speed. He said, that's not possible. I know because I've flown those planes and I've trained people to fly those planes for decades. It's all a lie. As Audi would say, it's all a lie, damn it. When you're talking about 9/11, it truly is the case. Real Jason Barker said, I was reading about the tech to steer hurricanes in the mid-2000s, back when it wasn't if they could do it, but to what degree. Yeah, absolutely right. And that is where we always are. And yet, if you and I say that, we're denounced as wild-eyed conspiracy theorists to say that they can do what they're boasting about. Jerry Alatalo says, an old video is going viral of then Vice President Lyndon Johnson saying, he who controls the weather will control the world. Is made at Southwest Texas State University, May 27th, 1962. And of course, he's the guy who handed out the medal to the guy for weather control during the Vietnam War. I haven't seen that video, but that guy was a snake, wasn't he? LBJ. Hedge 88, these so-called autonomous taxis are actually drones piloted by a man in a third world country like a video game. Yeah, perhaps there was an interesting video. Huh?
I know they can take it over. I think a lot of the time it is being piloted by whatever algorithm, because that's why you see them going in circles so long. I'm sure that whenever it gets to a troublesome spot, they take it
Either
over.
that or there's some people in some third world countries who are just having a lot of fun. Let's just drive this thing in circles. And
Let's see how long the passengers stay in the car.
That's right. Well, it's gotten to the point where with Tesla, they've done a lot of manual intervention, and they even had people following their cars so it could take over. They wanted to see what they were doing. That came out. Audi, Modern Retro Radio, good to see you, said the goal is to outprice the working class so that you'll own nothing and be happy. That's absolutely true. When you look at it, it's raise the price of the cars and the houses so nobody can afford it. And they don't just stop there. I mean, these people don't have one tactic. It is, as Shiva Ayyadurai said, Dr. Shiva, it really is kind of a swarm. It's a swarm of people. It's a swarm of programs, a swarm of politicians, and it's a swarm of tactics, all to accomplish the same thing, coming from different angles. It is like a drone swarm that's coming after us. MAV 2022 says production and health context in the U.S. Bayer, through its subsidiary Monsanto, is the sole producer of elemental phosphorus, which is processed into glyphosate for agriculture, sold to the ICL group for military applications, while glyphosate is classified as probably carcinogenic to the humans by the World Health Organization. White phosphorus itself is acutely toxic. It ignites spontaneously in the air, and it causes deep tissue damage upon contact. Again, that's why the Israelis use it. That's why people say it's a war crime to use it. MAV 2022, my neighbors spray their lawns for dandelions while living across from a field full of dandelions. Their dogs died of cancer, and they're clueless as to why. That was what happened to our dogs. Matter of fact, in the early 1980s, we had a basset hound, and he was a master of escaping out of our fenced yard. And the other thing that was really strange about him was how much he liked to eat grass. Well, we had neighbors, several of them, as a matter of fact, who would use Kim Lawn. They'd put up signs saying, keep your kids and your dogs off the lawn. It's like, why would I pay somebody to do that to my lawn? I never understood. But he got over there. He ate some grass and everything. Before we knew it, he was sick. He had cancer. And I hadn't made the connection. But while we were treating him at the vet hospital at NC State, I heard this report on the radio where they were talking about how these farmers were coming down, and it was exactly the same cancer that our dog had. And they were handling glyphosate. And I thought, oh, okay, that's what they're spraying, the weed control they're spraying on the lawns. So Real Jason Barker said there's a big hype about Trump mandating the flu vaccine in the military. It's always been mandated, but the difference is that it's bundled with mRNA now. So the people who made it past the COVID jab mandates are now being mandated again via the flu shot. There we go. It just keeps coming back around, doesn't it? Vax Daddy, that's what he is. Yeah, I'm the father of the vaccine. Be My Valentine says, if I order the Civil Defense Manual, can I enter a code that will acknowledge the David Knight Show? No, there isn't any code, I don't think. I think it's just at the website. It's available to everybody, and he doesn't track that. Some of them do. Like if you get a subscription to Trends Journal, if you use the code, not only does it save you 10% if you use the code Knight, but it also lets them know that you came through us, and there is a specific agreement with that. Same thing with RNC stores. If you go there and get books about health, if you get B17, which I would advise, then use the code Knight, then you save 10%, and also lets them know that you came through us. But there's nothing about that for the Civil Defense Manual. So go and enjoy that. It's almost half off. It truly is amazing how he has dropped the price for that. And it is a great resource. Everybody should have a pair of these books. And he doesn't sell them one at a time. He sells them as a pair because you need the bigger picture that's there. Well, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the shenanigans of Trump over the weekend. You won't believe what he's been up to. We'll take a quick break, and we will be right back.
But unlike most revolutions where the people rise against a real economic oppression, In our case here in Boston, we are fighting for purely an abstract principle. Hear, hear. It is, however, not nearly so abstract as the young gentleman supposes. The issue involved here is one of monopoly. Today, the British government will monopolize the sale of tea in our country. Tomorrow, it will be something else.
Liberty. It's your move. You're listening to The David Knight Show.
Whether you're feeling like the blues or bluegrass, APS Radio has you covered. Check out a wide variety of channels on our app at apsradio.com.
Well, we had Trump speak at the Faith and Freedom Coalition. Now, these people who identify as evangelical Christians, but they really don't understand faith or freedom, I would say, because these people would not be cheering Trump if they did. He comes before them and he says, I would be the greatest communist in history. Well, how does he identify a communist? He says, communists, they hate Christians. He said, they'll close your churches and kill your people. It's like, wait a minute. You did that in 2020. And a lot of these people who are leaders of Faith and Freedom Coalition are evangelicals who went out there and sold this poisonous jab to the people who trusted them. Yeah. And of course, this is a guy who has absolutely no principles. And when it comes to religious liberty, look what he did. He created a Religious Liberty Commission. And one of the first things they did was to kick off Carrie Prejean Baller, because she said, if I criticize Zionism, I'm criticizing a government. I am not criticizing somebody's religion. I should be free to do that because my religion is different. And by the way, you're also free to criticize somebody's religion as well. If you disagree with what they have to say, you're free to do so without punishment from the government. Well, it turns out that Trump's Religious Liberty Commission is really, if you wanted to accurately name it, you would call it the Trump Religious Liberty Omission. You're not going to have the liberty to criticize a theology or a political ideology of a foreign country even, or you get kicked off by this guy who says, I'd be the greatest communist. Pal, you already are. You already check all the boxes that you mentioned here, as a matter of fact. And these people actually cheered him. That's the amazing thing. I guess it's not amazing because they cheered him in 2020 when he was doing this stuff. I think I'd be the greatest communist in history. I'd give away housing and food and more for free. Yeah, with strings attached, right? Is that what really happens with communism? Everybody gets free stuff? No. As one person said, yeah, they pretend to pay us and we pretend to obey them. That's the way it's going to be. He said all communists are godless. Well, he checked that box as well, didn't he? He said assassination is a big deal for them. Look at what Trump has done and his Zionist allies. They love to assassinate people. They love to kidnap people, all the rest of the stuff. So again, he's checking all of the boxes here. He is not above bribing people to get their votes, just as the communists do. And why do you bring this up? Well, because there's a big discussion in the Democrat Party right now, as you've seen, big wins by Mom Danny, a socialist, a self-proclaimed socialist in New York, another self-proclaimed socialist in Washington, D.C. So that's put it right on the front burner for Trump. And to the extent that you've got some Democrats out there saying, we're taking a pledge, we don't support communism or socialism. It's like, well, You always have. You may not support it in the explicit way these people have supported it, or to the extent that they've supported it, but you are there as moving the Overton window toward it, nevertheless. But when you look at what Trump is doing, I really think when you go back and you look at this, Theodore Reich wrote a book called The Compulsion to Confess. And he was talking about psychopaths. He said they've got a compulsion to confess their crimes. And it's often driven by narcissism. Now, I'm not a psychologist and I don't pretend to be one, but I think we can pretty much see that Trump has a compulsion to confess his crimes. We can pretty much see that he's a psychopath and a narcissist as well. So Trump said communists often target religion, particularly Christians, which is what he did, right? He's targeted Christians with the Religious Liberty Omission group that he's got. And he says they will close your churches. They will kill your people. And it's like it's 2020 all over again, right? The crowd of Christians boisterously cheered as the president spoke. And many of them are the same people who cheered as Trump closed the churches and created the bioweapon poison to kill their people. A social media post published just before he came on stage, Trump wrote, "All communist countries attack religions violently. They'll close your churches, they'll kill your people." His compulsion to confess, folks. So Trump noted how he'd set up the Department of Justice task force to eradicate anti-Christian discrimination and a Department of Education directive to protect prayer in schools. Well, so much for religious liberty. You don't have the liberty to worship Christ as you choose if it gets in the way of political Israel. That's basically what Mike Huckster Beebe is telling people, telling Christians. This guy, folks, is actively anti-Christ. He opposes Christ. He says Israel is the foundation of the Christian faith, not Christ. This guy is an antichrist when it comes to it. And again, antichrist is, one person commented last week, said he didn't think that antichrist was a person. When you look at the beast, right, what is the beast? It's pretty clear through Revelations that the beast is referring to not necessarily some kind of Godzilla or something like that, but it's referring to governments, which are probably more destructive than Godzilla. They can trash your cities far more effectively than a rampaging, fire-breathing monster. But no, the beast is, over and over again, it refers to governments. And so the mark of the beast is really the mark of the government. That's what Marcia Blackbeast wants to put in, the Marcia of the Beast, that she wants to put in this government ID system. Now, whenever we talk about governments, we do have people tend to talk about Trump or Putin more than they talk about the American government or the Russian government, because we now have a proud dictator who is running our country. So, you know, from that standpoint, you could look at it as being an individual. I really don't know, and I don't really take a position on that. I do know that the term Antichrist is used by John. He never refers to an Antichrist as an individual. People pick that up from other passages that talk about the man of sin or the man of perdition or the man of rebellion. I think that is a particular person. Now, that also could refer to the state of mankind in general. So there's some ambiguity there. That's why we call it apocalyptic literature, because the full meaning is somewhat hidden until it actually happens. That's the way it is with prophecy. But we have seen the prophecies fulfilled in Jesus Christ, but people like Mike Huckabee don't want you to see that. They want you to see all the prophecies about Jesus not being fulfilled in Jesus, but being fulfilled in some future time about the political state of Israel. That's why I say he is Antichrist. Trump says he's very disappointed that he wasn't mentioned in the Declaration of Independence alongside of God. Imagine that. You know, it's not funny when he keeps comparing himself to communists, to dictators, to kings, comparing himself to God, it gets kind of tiresome after a while. And after a while, you should realize that it's not a joke anymore. He's the joke. And he is playing you. He's laughing at you because he has a compulsion to confess as a narcissist to how he sees himself. He constantly compares himself to God. He's acting like a communist. And of course, the communists always think that they are God, right? That's why they come after religion, especially Christianity, because they are God. They want government to be God. They want Godverment. They want a government that is omniscient. That's what your data centers are about. Omnipresent. That's what your data centers and flock cameras are all about. And omnipotent, all powerful. And so it is a desire of people like Trump and his ilk to be like God. And this is what he said to them. It said in a statement, he said, "Our founders invoked the Creator 4 times in the Declaration of Independence. 4 times. I wasn't mentioned once. I'm very upset about that. Not once." You see, America is always about him, isn't it? Well, actually, if you read the Declaration of Independence, I see Trump in there very clearly, in the person of King George. Trump is exactly the kind of person that they declared independence from. Trump wants the exact kind of system that they said had to be eradicated, that they fought against, that they wrote a constitution to prevent. Trump is there in the Declaration of Independence. He's just on the wrong side. He's on the wrong side of that document. And so he said, "I've officially rededicated America as one nation under God, and we're not changing it," he said. And I got to say, when you look at the man's actions and even his words, to say that it's one nation under God is truly meaningless virtue signaling. It is the ultimate virtue signal, and it is not at the least whit true. America is not under God, unfortunately. It is under rebellion to God. Of course, everything is under God, but what they're talking about is somebody who has put themselves under a nation that has put itself under God and his laws, and we are in open rebellion to God and his laws. So what would Trump say if we asked him what the founders saw as the real purpose of government? Since he's obviously not read the Constitution except to do a word search to see if his name is in it, what would he say the purpose of government is as the founders saw it? Well, you don't have to get past the first paragraph to understand that. They made it very clear that we are endowed by our Creator with inalienable rights, and that it is to secure those rights that governments are instituted among men. So there you go, right there. You don't even have to get to the good part where it says when governments become destructive of those rights, like Donald Trump, it is the right and the duty of the people to overthrow a government like that. Nevertheless, the bottom line is the purpose of government, according to the founders, is to secure our God-given rights. And yet, what has Trump done? He has come against our God-given rights, especially against those that are enumerated in the Bill of Rights. And again, it is not an exhaustive list of all of our rights, but he has done everything that he can to destroy our God-given rights, while he's complaining about the fact that he's not God and not recognized as God. And yet he does seem to recognize himself. Trump has now talked over the weekend about the new U.S. passport design. It's got a scowling picture of him, like an angry mafia don, of course. And in it, there he is. He's leaning forward even, to threaten people. So there's this threatening mugshot of this tin-pot dictator, Donald Trump. And he writes on there, "Welcome, but be good." He doesn't even know what a passport's for. A passport is for American citizens. It's not for people coming to this country. It's not a visa. This is a passport. This is for, welcome to America. Be good now. He is absolutely an idiot. He just certified that he's an idiot with this. He doesn't even know what a passport is for. Isn't that amazing? And then he puts out a social media post It wasn't enough for him to say, hey, God is mentioned in the Declaration of Independence, but not me. So then he puts out a picture of himself as Atlas. He's got the weight of the world on his shoulders. Well, hey, just let it go, Trump. You don't have to be the ruler of the world. That's not a title that you have any justification for anyway. But that's what you think you are. As a matter of fact, I look at that and I think, a lot of people around the world are going to look at this around the world and in America. And when Trump is finally gone, I think what they'll say is, at last he's gone. They'll just shrug and say, oh, well, anyway, at last he's gone. But he puts it out there as if it is Atlas shrugged. He portrays himself as a god, just not as the god, which, of course, he did famously as he portrayed himself as Jesus healing people. And then he said, oh, I thought that was about a physician. They were in a hospital, and you've got Trump in a red robe, as people have so often portrayed Jesus in religious artwork and everything. And he said, no, I thought that was me as a doctor, because doctors always wear those red robes when they go on their hospital calls, right? Actually, I'd feel a little bit better if they did. It's like, so do you have some affiliation with Jesus in some way, shape, or form? Because otherwise, I don't know really what checks what you're doing. Are you doing this because you think it's going to help, or because you just simply want to make money? So Trump has vowed strict penalties for anybody that messes with his reflecting pond. And as I said before, many people have said, yeah, he's deflecting with this, isn't he? He's deflecting from a lot of different things. But I think it also is a reflection of his character. And I think it's kind of interesting that he's doing exactly the same thing to people who are mocking his pond, or he claims that they damaged it with a 350-foot gash. There's no evidence of that whatsoever. He claims it's being destroyed by vandals. They've not produced any footage of that happening. And so is any of that true? Personally, I don't think it is. Yet, nevertheless, what he's doing is, let's say that it was true. Let's say that somebody did cut his precious pool. He is threatening to put people in jail for 10 years. When I look at this, I see a reflection, not just of his ego, but I see a reflection of Joe Biden. Because it was Joe Biden and the Democrats, remember, who, oh, look at this. This guy put his feet up on Nancy Pelosi's desk. Give him life in prison. That type of excessive punishment. Again, these people don't know or care about the Bill of Rights. And so what Trump is doing, look, if somebody damaged his property or something, fine. Give him a penalty, right? Maybe even a little bit of jail time. But this is excessive punishment. 10 years for messing with his pond. You want to know who really messed with your pond, Trump? It's that convicted criminal that you gave the no-bid contract to. That's what people are pointing to. You want to know who sabotaged it? It's probably that guy. If you got a 350-foot gash, which nobody has seen any evidence of, is probably from the guy who has been convicted 2 times for bribing officials. And Trump gave him a no-bid contract. So Trump warned in a post the destruction of national monuments could carry lengthy prison sentences of up to 10 years behind bars. He said this law safeguards U.S. property from deliberate destruction or attempted destruction. The one thing that's not safeguarded from deliberate destruction or attempted destruction are the children. The children that he damages with his vaccines. The children that he and Jeffrey Epstein raped and manhandled. And the people that he's covering up for that did that directly to the children. None of them are facing any penalties, and yet he's already got 5 or 6 people that he wants to send to jail for a decade for merely sticking his hand in the pond to feel it. He said, I didn't cut anything, I didn't pull anything out. His lawyer said, it's not against the law to touch water. But you better not do it around his reflecting pond, right? Despite the administration's focus on criminal activity, the rapid deterioration of the pool's new coating has drawn intense technical scrutiny. The peeling and the heavy algae growth became visible almost immediately. after the multi-million-dollar renovation was completed. And nobody's even talking about the dollar amounts anymore. To me, I think it was very key that you go back and you look at the original contract. The original no-bid contract was for $13 million. What did you tell people it was going to cost? He started out with $2 million, and then he gradually goes up from $2 million. Now it's a little bit more, now it's a little bit more. And finally, it jumps to $13 million. It was $13 million from the beginning. Trump was lying to people, lying to the public, and manipulating the public. And he did exactly the same thing with his ballroom stuff. If you look at the contract for the ballroom, where it wound up going was where it started. He was lying to people for the longest time about what it was going to cost. And of course, he was lying to people about the fact that it's going to be paid for by his private donor club. It's going to be paid for by the taxpayers. So architectural and coating experts note that the underwater liners frequently fail due to improper surface preparation, due to moisture trapping, or due to inadequate curing times. Now, Trump himself could be responsible for that last one because he's rush. Got to get this done. So ironically, he's doing exactly the same thing that Biden did for the J6 people, coming up with excessive and unusual punishment for minor things. Yeah, if somebody breaks windows at the congressional building, or they put their feet on Pelosi's desk or something like that, damage something, okay, there's a penalty for that, but it can't be excessive. You can't take them out and shoot them in front of a firing squad, for example, and you can't send them to jail for 10 years. Of course, Biden did that with the J6ers. Trump is doing that now with the people around his reflecting pond. Meanwhile, he sued the BBC for $10 billion with a B, $10 billion. That's his favorite number when he sues people, $10 billion. And because of something they said about what he said or did around January the 6th. So now the BBC is demanding discovery, blowback. And I said this about Michael Wolff. Again, for the longest time, Melania Trump would threaten with massive lawsuits, billions of dollars, right? Anybody who repeated what Michael Wolff had said, Jeffrey Epstein told him in his interviews about Melania Trump. And if you repeated that, Melania Trump would threaten you. And I said, for the longest time, I said, so why don't they threaten Michael Wolff? He's the one that everybody's quoting. He's the source of all this. When people attribute this to Michael Wolff, I don't see where they have any liability in that whatsoever. They tell people where that's coming from. People can judge for themselves whether they think Michael Wolff is a credible source or not. And so finally they did talk about suing Michael Wolff, and he didn't wait. He sued them. Now, it'll be interesting to see what happens in that discovery, because the BBC is going to do discovery on January the 6th, and not just on January the 6th in general. Specifically, they're asking for information, excuse me, about Stop the Steal, including, but not limited to, the planning of the event and what was done before and after. I wonder if Alex is going to have to go testify about this. I mean, he was the point man for planning Stop the Steal, wasn't he? The demand represents a calculated legal strategy to force Trump to either produce damaging evidence or to risk judicial sanctions for noncompliance, putting the president and his lawyers in the position of having to lay all their cards on the table. He keeps telling us, I've got all the cards. Well, put them on the table. Let's see what you got. I think maybe you're bluffing here. So Trump's legal team is accusing the BBC of attempting to put the president on trial for the riot. Maybe he should be. Maybe some other people who planned this and pushed this to make money ought to be put on trial as well. As a matter of fact, as you know, and I've mentioned it many times, I got fired for pushing back against Stop the Steal and against a lot of the nonsense that was originating out of Alex Jones and InfoWars. Now even QAnon hates Trump. This is a report from the Bulwark. Alex Jones hates him. Of course, he always did. He hated him behind the scenes when he was telling everybody what a great leader he was, the greatest president of all time. He absolutely trash-talked Trump all the time. And you've seen some of the clips that some of the people at InfoWars have leaked. And it truly was amazing. The calculated, it wasn't just hypocrisy, but the calculated, cynical misdirection and misleading that Alex Jones and many at InfoWars did, knowing what was happening. And Steve Pieczenik was one of the key ones there. Of course, QAnon. Now, QAnon is very angry at Trump because he's using a lot of their memes. He's actually putting out stuff about 4D chess and trust the plan and all the rest of this stuff. Alex Jones was right there with QAnon at the very beginning. And so was Jerome Corsi. I had, the last time I had Jerome Corsi on my program, and he was, at the time he was working for InfoWars, and he was in Washington trying to get press credentials to be in the press corps during the first Trump administration. And so I would talk to him about that and about some good things that Jerome Corsi had done. But then he came on and he talked about QAnon. He rode this QAnon thing more than anybody to fame. Jerome Corsi did. He made a tremendous amount of money pushing a book. I mean, he was even advertising it on Rush Limbaugh and making a lot of money off of that. He came on my program, I think it was late 2000, I don't know, 18 or 19. It was around Christmas time he came on. And he said, yeah, we got this QAnon prediction, and it was always done in these quatrains like it was Nostradamus or some kind of BS like that. It was immediately, did not pass the sniff test with me. If you're going to, first of all, say that you're anonymous, then that raises a lot of question marks. But then when you start talking in these metaphorical quatrains like Nostradamus, that's it. Okay, you're anonymous and you're talking in riddles, and you can interpret this stuff in retrospect to mean anything that you want it to mean. And so what Jerome was saying was, yeah, there's this stuff out there saying the bird will be flying free, something like that, and something about red and white. And he goes, so that's about Switzerland. So I think what's going to happen is that Julian Assange is going to be released, and he's going to be released into Switzerland. And I said, yeah, well, I don't know that we can trust that. And we got off the air, and I told the crew, I said, don't ever book him again. I'm not talking to Jerome Corsi again, ever. So Trump administration is now using the QAnon slogans in a campaign targeting the Southern Poverty Law Center. And they're not happy about how he is co-opting the terminology that somebody had created. So Trump administration launched a bizarre QAnon-themed social media campaign this week using slogans like trust the plan, even a fake Q post to promote Trump's executive orders on quantum computing. Where have we heard that before? Remember that? Steve Pieczenik coming on with Owen Schroyer 2 days after the election, saying, yeah, we did blockchain watermark ballots, and we got quantum computers, and it's all in space and all this other. And we know exactly what's going on. We got 20,000 National Guard out there right now arresting people, and all of it lies. I push back against that. This deep state agent, Steve Pieczenik, one of many that Alex was constantly platforming at InfoWars. And I was told by Alex's producer that by Daria, she said, you need to stop pushing back against Steve Pieczenik in the Sting. He's demanded that you be fired. And she said, Alex is close to doing it. And he eventually did fire me for that, because he takes orders from the CIA. Steve Pieczenik is a CIA disinformation agent, and no question about it. So the Department of Defense account, here we go, the deep state here, tweeted out, where we go one, we go quantum. And then did a play on the QAnon motto, where we go one, we go all, right? So now, they didn't have quantum computing back in 2020. They don't have it today even. As a matter of fact, what they're talking about is Trump's executive orders to push it as hard as he can, throw as much money as he can, because, money is no object. We don't care about the $40 trillion worth of debt. Who cares about that? Just numbers. And so why would the administration play footsie with QAnon, says the Bulwark. The Trump has frequently posted QAnon memes in the past, albeit not this explicitly. And of course, QAnon people are not happy with him because they said at some of these rallies, because everybody was looking at QAnon and saying, these people are nuts. It is a controlled narrative. And so the people who were there who believed in all this stuff were showing up with QAnon merchandise, and the Trump people were pushing them out. So that started this pushback. Perhaps if it hadn't been for that, they would have never caught on. But, you know, a big part of this was the fact that Trump was out there rounding up pedophile rings. What a laughable notion that is, when you look at how he has covered for the biggest pedophile ring, Jeffrey Epstein. He said, "We're done being treated like excrement," said one QAnon promoter, Liz Kraken. She said, "Q believers' lives have been destroyed while Trump did nothing." Yeah, you could say that about all of America, except it's not just that he passively did nothing. He has actively worked to destroy our economy with tariffs, with oil embargoes, with war, you name it. After trying to block the release of the Epstein files and failing to deliver deep state arrests, some of the movement's dissatisfied stars think it's a bit gauche, if not insulting, that the president and his team are appropriating QAnon culture, says the Bulwark. And they mention Marjorie Taylor Greene. She says, "Well, now they're trying to throw out all that QAnon slop and propaganda to get you guys sucked back in." Yeah, that's exactly what Alex Jones and Jerome Corsi and Steve Pieczenik were doing. They were constantly feeding people lies and buzzwords and riddles and mysteries. Yeah, we know who this Q guy is, they said. Yeah, but they wouldn't tell anybody, right? Now that Trump's approval is in the toilet, said Marjorie Taylor Greene, after endless broken promises to the American people and blatantly Israel first policies, they're using Q propaganda as a last-ditch desperate attempt to reel in the deceived loyalist. It's so freaking cringe, I said. And this is not Marjorie Taylor Greene. This is somebody who was commenting on it. And I got to say, to me, it was always cringe. How could anybody look at this stuff and not think that it was cringe? The idea of quantum computing is such a big part of QAnon lore, they said. And I didn't know that because I didn't pay any attention to the details of what they're doing. That's one of the reasons why Steve Pieczenik seized on it when he went on with Owen Schroyer. There was a guy in particular whose name was Baby Q. He was real big on the quantum computing stuff, as a matter of fact. He's someone who also claimed to be a time traveler. I guarantee you that if some CIA agent, disinfo agent like Steve Pieczenik came in and went on with Alex Jones would push that the guy was a time traveler. He would do that. He would laugh about it, but he'd kind of wink like, hey, this may be true. Same thing he did with Steve Pieczenik. So this guy later pled guilty to federal extortion charges and served time in jail. Baby Q. Yeah, I think we had a lot of people got thrown into the fire. I guess we could call it barbecue, right? That's what happened to a lot of the QAnon followers.
He can do the time easily with his time travel machine.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he just... I'm out already. That's cool, yeah. AP Rumble Seed. I suspect Mom Danny may be a World Economic Forum plant. He seems to be best buddies with George Soros' son. Got the pictures to prove it. Well, yeah, of course. And when you look at it, these guys, there's a huge, if you got a Venn diagram and you draw where the technocrats are and the fascists are and the communists are in it, there's a huge overlap of those different circles. They are not, three separate things out there. They're really pulled together. It's like a Mickey Mouse profile logo. Even worse. There's a lot more overlap than there is in Mickey's three-circle head that they've got. Real Jason Barker again. He says koi fish in the pond would solve the algae problem, and Trump could go sell fish food to tourists to monetize it. Yeah, that's right. They'd rather use chemicals, though, Jason. You can probably get a discount on them from some of his donors that are out there. That's the way these guys work. Well, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
You're listening to The David Knight Show.
Tell Alexa to add the APS radio skill and have access to the best channels anywhere. From country to blues, classic hits to news, APS Radio curates incredibly diverse playlists for you to enjoy. Get details at apsradio.com.
Well, we're almost out of time today, so I'm not going to talk about Trump's wars, both economic as well as kinetic, and how he restarted this whole thing with Iran over the weekend. Again, people can play the who started this, who fired first, the old tit for tat thing. That's why Lance was talking about the prisoner dilemma that's there. Of course, there will be no forgiveness in the Trump algorithm. It is strictly a tit for tat algorithm that is there. But so we're going to take a day off of that, but I'll get back on that tomorrow, what is going on. It truly is horrific what is happening with all this and the economic consequences that are there. Trump is, if he wants to compare himself to Atlas, looks like what he's doing is carrying the world on his shoulders so he can carry it to the dump and throw it in the dumpster and set it on fire.
Yeah, it's not tit for tat when he's preemptive striking an assumption that, well, maybe they'll go against us sometime.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that whole thing came up from the Rand Corporation saying, what do we do about nuclear war and this mutually assured destruction? Because if we fire first, we might be able to wipe out the other guys before they can retaliate. So they started wargaming that. That's where the prisoner's dilemma came from. Let's talk a little bit about what is happening with vaccines, with ivermectin, because we have some big news on both these fronts. Actually, this is not big news, but it is good news. You got anti-vaxxers are coupling up on apps for the unjected single. So this is a dating app for people who are not vaccinated. And it is ridiculed and mocked endlessly by the Washington Post. And they put up at the top, of course, democracy dies in darkness and people die with lies about big pharmaceutical companies. And that's what they're pushing, Washington Post. So they start with a couple who are in their 20s, late 20s. And one person said she was scrolling through Instagram 4 years ago when she came across Unjected, a dating app for people who choose not to receive the COVID-19 vaccine. She was wary of how quickly the vaccine had been developed, she said, and she was distrustful of the government's support for it. And so on that, she met somebody that she later married. So they talk about that. They always that's the structure that these mainstream media people do. They always pick a particular human interest story, and then they build the broader story out from that. Her view of the American medical system boils down to, she puts it, you can't trust the doctors anymore. She believes that some doctors are beholden to the pharmaceutical industry. Some? That's charitable. I would say the vast majority are, and if they aren't, they get kicked out of this corrupt system. Unjected attracted someone she described as highly questioning, who wants to stay strong for their family and not submit to whatever the TV says, she said. Well, that's really based, I think. It describes itself as a platform to connect those who share like-minded values and the convictions to remain unvaccinated. The app began operation in 2021, and it was purged by Google and Apple. Isn't that interesting? They've now been reinstated by Apple after doing some moderation of comments that were there. But now for a word from our sponsor, says the Washington Post. The introduction of the COVID-19 vaccine in late 2020 saved millions of lives. There we go. Now we're done with that mandatory lie for their sponsor. We can get on with the article here. Dropping vaccination rates have caused some infectious diseases to roar back, putting infants and the elderly at risk, they say. Again, this is more messages from their sponsor. The reality is that SIDS has fallen dramatically as people have gotten skeptical of the vaccine schedule and the massive number of injections being pushed on them by the medical establishment. So that's the silver lining behind all this. Data reported by the CDC shows that non-medical exemptions for childhood vaccines have reached an all-time high as the sudden infant death syndrome is falling dramatically. Imagine that. Measles are growing into outbreaks that have not been seen in decades. Everybody got measles when I was a kid. No big deal. But nobody had autism. So make of that what you will. When Unjected hosted in-person meetups across 4 cities this spring, It sparked anger online. See, this is the kind of people that push back against this. They don't want you to have information, and they don't want your consent. They're against informed consent. So anti-vaxxers get a chance to fall in love with others who do not understand science, read the headline of a Denver Post column. Imagine that. I would say these are people the people who are attacking the anti-vaxxers are people who, A, don't understand science, B, don't understand politics and human nature. That's where they are really lacking. So Scott Armstrong is the operations director at Unjected. He said he thinks that many anti-vaxxers are often pigeonholed for being part of MAGA. He said, but who invented the vaccine? Donald Trump, he said. He said, there is no love for Trump around here at all. As a matter of fact, if you understand what happened in 2020, how could you support Trump for doing that? That's why, when I get so many of these MAGA people, I would put on X, I put something about Trump as the father of the vaccine. Boy, they would come after me. Just unbelievable how hateful they got with that. And I mean, these are people that are not lefties reading the Denver Post. These are conservatives who love Trump. And I said, give him the credit that he demands. He calls himself the father of the vaccine. He boasts about what he did. Why are you trying to save him from that? You understand how bad the vaccine is, and yet you want to inoculate Trump against criticism. Truly is amazing. So he says, there's no love for Trump around here at all. Exactly the opposite, in fact, he said. So these are some savvy people that are there. The bulk of the 65,000 active users are between the ages of 25 and 45. Largest user bases are in cities that had some of the strictest pandemic lockdowns. Places like Portland, Denver, Toronto, Phoenix. There are no people in Alabama, for example. This is what I've seen in my travels. The places that I would get recognized would be in places like Washington and Oregon. People who are really under the thumb of the socialist tyrants up there, they're desperate to get away from that. People just kind of take it for granted if you're in some place that hasn't been locked down. So the guy who is the operations head there at Unjabbed said he doesn't need his friends to be vaccinated. He said, to be unvaccinated, rather. He said it is a requirement, however, for his long-term partner. He said, I sacrificed a lot to remain unvaccinated. It was not an easy choice. I lost a job. I lost all of my friends, he said. So you see, we can accept people who are vaccinated, but the vaccinated in many cases can't accept people who are unvaccinated. You must be a part of their herd. That is the herd mentality, not herd immunity. He remains steadfast because of his concerns that some employers are mandating the vaccine, especially given what he called its accelerated development. The vaccine was able to be developed in 11 months. This is another one of their commercials. Based on research spanning decades, scientists at the Washington Post told the Washington Post in December 2020, it was in the development for 20 years, and so was the lockdown. You go back to Dark Winter, and you go back to DARPA. When DARPA has been planning and practicing something like this for a long time, and the very first one is Dark Winter, you better be very cautious about what is happening with this. He said he wanted a partner who had that level of resilience, who was willing to endure what it took to remain unvaccinated. To me, that is somebody that I would want to be the mother of my kids. That's what it's really about, folks. It really is. It's about having, understanding what you believe and why you believe it. And this is just one aspect in your life. Of course, that really does apply to a Christian website. But, when you look at this, the intersection between these two things, how do you find a Christian who understands the vaccination stuff? Well, there's some out there, but they can be hard to find. Maybe this will help. Thanks for joining us. Have a good day. The common man. They created Common Core to dumb down our children. They created Common Pass to track and control us. Their Commons Project, to make sure the commoners own nothing, and the communist future. They see the common man as simple, unsophisticated, ordinary. But each of us has worth and dignity, created in the image of God. That is what we have in common. That is what they want to take away. Their most powerful weapons are isolation, deception, intimidation. They desire to know everything about us while they hide everything from us. It's time to turn that around and expose what they want to hide. Please share the information and links you'll find at thedavidknightshow.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. If you can't support us financially, please keep us in your prayers. thedavidknightshow.com.